Good evening, everybody. This is Kathy L. Murphy, the Pulpit Queen, reporting live from my little cabin in the woods, Murphy's Law. It is a beautiful sunny day here in East Texas, and we're now talking with our author has our International Book of the Month. I'm going to show it to you. It's the best cover ever. How to Date a Flying Mexican. And this is a collection of stories, new and collected stories. Um, Beautiful story, beautiful imagery. And it's stories of magic realism, which is a real hot topic amongst my readers with the book club. So, first, I'd like to just let you introduce yourself and tell a little bit about your upbringing and where does this all come from?
Oh, sure. Well, thank you, Kathy. And um, I'm delighted to be a guest. So I am the middle of five children, the grandson of Mexican immigrants. My grandparents came to LA over 100 years ago,
Wow.
around 1920,
Hmm.
and settled in Los Angeles. And, they were working people. And with each successive generation, our lives improved. I grew up near downtown Los Angeles. Um, I always loved books. My parents always made certain, even when money was tight, my parents always had books in the house. We had our library cards. And in fact, my late father, had wanted to be a writer. He worked in the factory in Watts, and at night and during the day, he would type on a quiet Royal Deluxe typewriter, the kind that Hemingway used. And this
Oh,
was
wow.
back in the late 50s, early 60s. But he never got published, and so he destroyed everything. And he focused on raising his family and and getting educated. And with five kids until my parents eventually went to college, they became preschool Head Start teachers.
Wow.
And then my dad continued on to get a business degree and master's, and then eventually became an executive with our rapid transit district here in Los Angeles. So I always loved books. My parents gave us that wonderful connection to literature. So I went off to Stanford, majored in English literature. I thought I'd become a professor, but my friend said, if you become a professor in literature, you have to be willing to live anywhere because that's how jobs are. And so I said, no, I want to live in LA. And so a friend of mine, Mike, I remember Mike, he said, become a lawyer, go to law school.
Oh
He
my.
said, he said, you like writing, you want to help people, And I said, okay. So I applied to law schools. I got into a bunch of schools. I got into UCLA. And so I went to UCLA. And for the last 33 years, I've been a lawyer with the California Department of Justice. I practice environmental enforcement, land use, and affordable housing. And I'm now a senior attorney with the department. So I run a team of about 50 lawyers and paralegals in the area of environmental enforcement and land use. But about 25 years ago, I started to write. Um, the love of literature had always stayed with me, and I wrote a novella loosely based on family history, and that got published by a small press. And then I just couldn't stop writing. So since then, I've now had published 10 books, edited 2 anthologies. I'm a playwright as well. I've had plays produced for readings and for the stage in LA and now New York. And I'm a book critic. I've written for New York Times, LA Times, and many other publications. And my most recent book is How to Date a Flying Mexican, which is why I'm here. And in fact, the Spanish edition comes out in May. University of Nevada Press is a wonderful publisher, and this has been a bestseller for them. So they got some grant money to do a Spanish edition because they want to reach the Spanish reading audience in the United States. And so that comes out in May. So I'm really excited about that. So I married my law school sweetheart, and she's an administrative law judge. And our son, Benjamin, who's 32, is a video game designer for a large video game company in San Diego. So that's my history.
It's absolutely amazing. But what is I was talking to Daniel before we came on the air, and I said what is amazing to me and the things I've discovered since I've been running the book club for 23 years. I've always been fascinated with the Southern Gothic Southern literature. I mean, Tennessee Williams, To Kill
Mhm.
a Mockingbird's my favorite book. I just love anything that is a little bit quirky and different. And since I started picking books, and I'm trying to figure out, I have two of your books here. I that I, in the past that I picked, and this devil talk. Oh my gosh, it has the best art on it. Tell the story about this cover too. It's really cool.
So I was aware of this artist, and this piece was owned by ASU, which is the publisher, Bilingual Press. And when the book got accepted for publication, I said I would love to have that piece as the cover. And essentially, it's an old story of a young woman who defies her parents and goes to a bar to meet a man, and she ends up dancing with the devil. And as you can see in the painting, the man she's dancing with has a rooster's foot and a cloven hoof for the other foot. So she ends up being seduced by the devil. So see, these are the kind of stories I grew up with.
I
Um,
know, and I kind of did too. It's really strange because my grandparents were big storytellers, and they'd always tell the most horrific tales, and those are the ones that stuck with me. Like diphtheria was very prevalent when my grandmother was a little girl, and she said there was at one time every day the glass covered coffins would go by horseback
mm,
with a child that had died of diphtheria.
mm.
And it's just, and those were really pretty tough things to listen to when you're a little bitty, but they stayed with me. And I realized that that's when I fell in love with the stories, hearing the family stories. And it sounds like the exact same thing with you too. So now, are any of your other siblings writers?
No, no. They're lawyers and social workers and teachers. I'm the only one who became the writer. And my dad passed in 2020. He had lung disease. And in the last few months of his life, I would go visit him in Ventura and sit and talk. And he never wanted to talk about my lawyer life. He wanted to talk about writing and literature. And he was so proud that I became a writer. Um, I think he was ahead of his time. The stories he was writing just were not being published. And I think that had he been born at a different time, he probably would have been published. Um,
Did he really destroy everything that he
mhm.
wrote?
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah, he burned it. In Los Angeles, the houses used to have these like backyard furnaces to burn leaves. They got outlawed in the early 60s because of smog in Los Angeles. But he burned everything. It was a real very definitive act on his part. And when I started getting published, he and my mom came to visit, and we were in my study. And he said, "What's that binder?" I said, "Oh, that binder's all my rejections, and the other binders are my acceptances." And he said, "Why do you keep your rejections?" I said, "Because they make me so mad. It makes me write and keep on submitting." And he said, "I just couldn't do that." He got 10 rejections for the novel he wrote, and then that was it. He just packed it up. He just couldn't accept the rejection. It's very difficult for him. And he's someone who, his mom passed when she was 35. His dad passed when he was 50. So he really didn't have the kind of support growing up that I had, so that I had that kind of security in my creative life that my parents gave us. He and his sister were kind of fended for themselves. So he lived a difficult life. And at age 18, he went off to fight in Korea, in 1950. He was of that generation when they were born in 1932. So there was a sense of practicality on his part. He figured, well, I tried to be a creative writer, I failed, so I'm going to just focus on a more practical way to live my life and to and put food on the table and raise my family. That's it's heartbreaking, but the thing
Look
is,
look at all you kids. I mean, how you grew up. So
yeah.
he did an excellent job.
Oh, he
I
did.
mean,
He did. Yeah, he did so much, and um, it was real funny when I started writing plays a few years ago, and they started being produced. He said, "How do you write plays? Why?" Somerset Maugham said writing plays is the hardest thing to do. Somerset Maugham was one of his favorite writers, and I said, "Well, actually, I love writing plays because I'm good at dialogue, and I've been told I'm good at dialogue, and I've seen actors perform my short stories, so I knew I can create scenes and stories through dialogue. So I had wanted to start writing. I taught myself how to write a play, and then started submitting it to theaters in Los Angeles, and it started being picked up for readings, and you know clearly clearly I was doing something right, and I was also creating characters that were not stereotypical. My actors, almost all of them, are Latinos and Latinas, when we would rehearse, they would thank me for creating characters who were not stereotypical, who ran
absolutely.
who ran the gamut from working class people to lawyers and everything in between. Not your typical stereotypical kind of gangbanger and that kind of typical trope that we've seen too much of. But that's a whole different part of my life. Writing plays. It's a different kind of experience because it's very collaborative, because when your actors are performing and rehearsing, you will actually take notes from them and change the dialogue and change things in the play, and your director will give you ideas on how to tweak certain things. When you're writing short stories or novel or poetry, it's a very lonely kind of thing. Yes, you have an editor when it gets published. Eventually, an editor works with you, but the creation is very, very different for writing plays. Oh, we have another guest
Yeah.
on
Is that
Antonina.
Antonina?
Yeah.
Yes.
Hi.
Hello.
All right.
Hi.
Hello.
Good
I'm
to
sorry
meet
I'm a
you.
little late, but I'm joining.
That's okay. That's okay.
Antonina is one of our authors that lives in San Antonio, but she came here from communist bloc Bulgaria.
Oh
And
my.
I'm actually working on her book cover, her next book cover right now. And I'm so happy because she likes it. So we're doing well. So anyway, I'm glad you're here, Antonina, and I'm glad you're
Yeah,
getting to hear Daniel speak. Okay.
I'm happy to see you all.
Yeah.
Welcome. Welcome. Um, Now I just had a couple of days ago, I had my birthday. I turned 64, and I already got my letter from Medicare, or we have to start thinking about
Oh, I'm already there.
about
Don't even
that. Yeah.
go there. I'm already there. And I proudly admit I'm on Medicare. So
And
get
so
those.
I feel like, I hear the footsteps. I feel like I have so much more to write.
Right.
If I'm lucky, I have another 20, 25 years on this earth. So I'm going to just keep on creating and writing. And I have a novel coming out next year, Chicano Frankenstein, that
What?
I'm very excited about. It's going to be
Oh,
published by Forest Avenue Press, a wonderful indie press out of Portland. And when it was announced in the marketplace, publishers marketplace, I got a email from a movie producer who's reading it now, and
I
then
bet
from so I'm excited, and that's sort of I'm reading another book. Actually, I'm reading a book called Artificial Life After Frankenstein by Professor Eileen Hunt Botting.
huh.
It's a birthday gift from my wife, and
Oh,
I've connected with her, and she's an expert on Mary Shelley, and she teaches at Notre Dame, and um, she calls Frankenstein a political science fiction. And my novel,
really?
yeah, um, and my novel is actually a very political novel. It's political satire. Um, takes
No, I
place
can't wait to read it.
takes place in the future, and reanimation is a way to repopulate the working population, but then there's a president who tries to use the reanimated people as a political football, and so the president, wants to make America safe again by clamping down on reanimation and
And the
so
president's a woman?
yes, President Mary Beth Cadwallader is her name.
Oh,
Though
boy.
she may remind some people of a different president in the way she
Okay.
the way she acts. So and then University of Nevada Press is publishing my new collection, My Chicano Heart, New and Collected Stories of Love and Other Transgressions, and that's coming out
Oh,
next year in
boy.
February. So
Wow, you've been busy.
I'm having fun, Kathy. I'm having fun just kind of telling stories, and my books are being picked up. They get picked up by colleges, so I get invited to colleges as a guest author, and that's always fun. Talking to young people, oftentimes, some of the kids studying my books are first generation college kids. Sometimes, like up at UC Davis, a lot of the kids are children of farm workers, and they're the first in their families to go to college. So for them, it's like the first time they're meeting someone who's telling stories that they can see their family members in the stories, and they recognize the cultural touchstones in the stories. And then at the end of the class, they'll come up to me and they'll say things like, "Oh, I want to be a writer now," or "I want to be a lawyer like you." So I get these young people,
Wow.
because if you can see it, you can be it, right? If you can see the role models out there, particularly where there aren't a lot of role models sometimes in certain professions for some kids, it means a lot to them.
Oh, that's very interesting, because I recently got back from Chicago. I spoke there to a group of students at their Slavic department at the University of Chicago, and I did get the same reaction, because I did give them facts of life in a communist country, what happened in Eastern Europe after the Second World War, and then of course life in immigration for people who arrive here from communist countries, and a lot of lessons in the book that I presented to them. But it was all inspirational. It just teaching people not to be afraid. If you want to be free, you cannot be afraid. You have to take the path to freedom.
Absolutely.
So I'm interested in the fact that you're also teaching at colleges and universities. That's really nice.
Well, as a guest author, by day I'm a government lawyer.
Guest.
Yeah.
Well, that's what I mean. That's
Yeah.
what I'm doing. I was a guest there. Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, we have
It's
another guest, Lovelace Cook.
Lovelace Cook.
Oh.
She's a podcaster and author, and she does Bollywood and books. And she's got a new book, Meet Me in Mumbai. So
Wow.
she's been all over the world, and she works for, she's been working on the tornado with FEMA, right, Lovelace, in Georgia?
I'm a public information officer with the SBA Office of Disaster Assistance. So, have disaster will travel. I'm probably going on the road next week and do not have a clue where, but it's so good.
Arkansas. You're going to Little Rock, I bet.
East of the Mississippi only, with my particular, well, for right now, who knows, could be California.
Yeah. Well, welcome. I'm glad you're here. So anyway, Daniel's telling us about his book, How to Date a Flying Mexican. Look at this art. Isn't it beautiful?
It is.
It's great.
So the subtitle is New and Collected Stories. So essentially, if you read the introduction, you'll see that I talk about how during the pandemic, which we're still kind of in, I started to read back on my prior books, and I decided to pull together some of my favorite stories that have been published in other collections over the last 25 years, and then and add a couple of new stories. And the title story was my late father's favorite story of mine because it made him laugh so hard, that story, and he just loved the cultural elements that I addressed in that story, which lovingly does bring in some magical realism tropes, but also addresses in a humorous way, the sexism within Catholic and Mexican culture, because the main character in that story is a woman who's an older woman who defies tradition in terms of how she lives. She doesn't need to marry. She loves having a series, of lovers, and the rest of her family and neighborhood kind of like, it bothers them a lot. They want her to like settle down. So it's it's sort of a modern take of magical realism by addressing the issue of sexism. And it's written in rules. There's 6 different rules about how to date a fly Mexican. And essentially the main character, Conchita, she falls in love with a widower who is able to levitate. So it's sort of like a manual about how to but not but the stories are kind of a mix. There's magical realism, there's some science fiction, there's some there's some speculative fiction, there's some fables, so I like to, one of the things that I never want to be is bored by writing. So I love writing in different styles. I have no reason to be stuck in one genre. So I write in many
box.
Yeah, why? There's no reason to be stuck in one box. I write because it gives me joy. It's an artistic expression, and I kind of view particularly short story writing sort of like if I were a character actor. Some of the best actors who have the longest lives in terms of their careers are character actors who can play different roles, and that's how I feel like I'm being like a character actor for 20 pages of a short story, and I just kind of run with the main characters, and then when I'm done, I put on a different hat and I play, I do a different kind of role, and it keeps things interesting and fun. I can't imagine, I hear writers talk, writers who write 800-page novel and they're going nuts. They've been writing for 10 years and they're sick of it. I never want to be like that. I want to be happy and joyous in my work. And I don't want to ever look at what I'm writing and start to resent it. So that's my approach.
It's kind of like I'm looking at all the beautiful art behind you, and I'm thinking about,
yeah.
Can you paint that one sold? Can you paint me one just like it? No, because to me, every painting is telling a unique story, like I'm doing on Antonita. I don't want, but people still recognize my style, because I'm very colorful. I think that's why I love the art. Now, I have to ask you, tell me about you. Are you a big art collector? You've got quite a bit behind you.
So my wife and I do collect a lot of art. She actually found these pieces. A lot of other pieces we've chosen together throughout the years. We've been together 40 years. We started dating back in 1981. So we're 40, so that's 42 years together. So we have a long history of collecting art. In college, I was an English major and almost a full art major.
Oh,
so I was art editor of the Stanford Chaparral, which is a humor magazine. And so I would do cartoons, and I had a staff of artists that I edited. And when I courted my wife, I used to draw her little cartoons, and we would study in the law library, and I would do little cartoons and drop them over the carrel to the other side.
That's so sweet.
And I would draw pictures for my son. So that's why I think book covers are so important, because of the artistic side of me. And luckily I work with publishers who care a lot about the beauty of a cover. And what's really wonderful about this particular design is that every story has a little tiny flying Mexican at a different place. See right there. So
Ah,
he's in a different place on every time, beginning of every story.
how did I miss that?
And then there he is. There he is.
Oh, there he is. Ah,
And I love the whimsy, and what I loved about this is it's sort of like if Marc Chagall was Mexican. I mean, that's how it
yes.
feels, right?
It's very Chagall. I
Very
love it.
Chagall.
But the colors are just so vibrant. And I was showing him earlier, you guys, I was so inspired. I started this little painting here. I don't know if you can see it, just,
Mhm.
and it's going to be called Somebody's Watching Me. And there's going to be something coming through the jungle. But anyway, because of that cover, I just love the colors, and it just, the stories inspire me. And I love the levitation. And everybody, when I say your title, it's kind of like when I said the Pulpit Queen's Tiara Wearing Book Sharing Guide to Life. They always laugh. I go, why is that funny? And they go, what's pulpwood? It's funny. And whenever I say this, they go, everybody laughs. How to date a flying Mexican. I go, why is that funny? And they just think but it gets their attention. So I guess that's great. It's great. So anyway, is this a California artist who did it?
So no, the artist is actually in-house. She works for University of Nevada Press, and her name is Trudy Gershinov.
Hmm.
So
I'll have to check it out.
she's a designer for University of Nevada Press.
But I'm going to check this one out too, the Devil Talk one, because I just think that's a great cover too. And I love the story behind Dancing with the Devil. So that's really great stories, you guys. And the one thing about when I went to work at the bookstore, I thought, oh, this was years ago when my oldest, she's now 32. When she was a baby, I went to work at an independent bookstore. I thought I could read all the time. You don't have any time to read. So they had a section that was short stories. And man, I hit that. I hit everything because I could read them quickly on a break or a lunch and keep it in the car. And I usually pick 2 or 3, short story collections a year because I just love them. I just love them.
Oh, that's the beauty of the short story. I have a lot of friends who are so busy with their schedules, and they read a story and put it down. Now, when I craft a collection, I'm very careful about the ordering of the
Absolutely.
stories in terms of tone and style. And I imagine it's like, a jazz musician putting together the tracks of a record. And
Choreography, or doing
yeah,
like a musical, how you would
right.
do.
And how you begin it and how you end it and what's in the middle, and the ebb and flow of stories. But a collection can be read differently. You can pick it up and just go to any story and read it, and that's okay too. There's nothing wrong with that. It's sort of like choosing one song on an album that you want to listen to at this particular moment. And when my books go through peer review, most of my books are published by university presses. They put books that are accepted. They go through a peer review where the manuscripts are sent to typically other writers or professors, and each reviewer will write 2 or 3 pages critique of the manuscript to say whether or not it should be published. And sometimes they'll say, love the book and explain, the different elements, but then suggest a reordering of some of the stories.
Yeah.
And which is okay. No, that's fine. That's fine. I don't always take every single bit of, a direction or advice, but these are people who are experts in the field, who read, who teach literature, who create literature. And and sometimes they have some very good advice. So when the book gets accepted by the publisher, then I can go back and tweak and rearrange and address any of the issues that had been raised by the reviewers. And that's one of the beauties of university presses. the peer review process, I think, is a very important process.
That's a new level of writers group there. I mean, you're getting experts. So I want to open this up to everybody that's here today to ask questions or comments, because Daniel is not on Facebook. So I posted, and I will post on this recording his email address if you have any questions. He is on LinkedIn, and I shared everything on LinkedIn because I know you're there, but
Mhm.
he's not on social media. So it was interesting getting the blog post this morning, but we got it done. It was no problem. But so does anybody have a comment or a question? Just go ahead and speak up.
I have a question.
Yes.
I'm interested to know, did you ever get a chance to read any of your father's work before he destroyed it?
No, sadly, no. He destroyed
Ugh.
it when I was still an infant when he destroyed everything. Because I'd asked him eventually as an adult, when I started publishing, I asked him if he saved anything, and my mom was in the room and she said no, he burned everything. Which is absolutely heartbreaking. You know, and he said he didn't want to go talk about what he wrote. You know, he wrote fiction and he wrote poetry. In fact, he gave me all his books on how to write poetry, because he figured he said, I figured you could use them since I'm not writing poetry anymore. But he still loved reading. I wrote a piece for Stanford Magazine about my father's last days, where a few days before he passed, he had been reading like 3 or 4 different books at the same time. You know, he would read fiction. He was very religious. He was Catholic, and so he would read books on Christian and Catholic theology. He read histories, but near the end of his life, he told my mom, he said, "Take the books away. I'm done."
Oh.
And I wrote an essay about his reading life, which was very deep, and he really was a very intellectual man. He's the one who introduced me in grade school, 4th and 5th grade, to people like Somerset Maugham and James Joyce, Cervantes. He had me read Don Quixote in English, when I was still in grade school. He had just a deep, deep love of the written word. And when he got into personnel at the Rapid Transit District, after he got a master's, he said that it's amazing how people could not write reports, and he took such care in writing reports that were approachable, in plain English, that told a story, and whenever he did write a letter, he would send me a letter when I was up at Stanford. It was meticulous. It was just so perfectly written and balanced. So no, sadly, I never got to read his work, but he lived it.
Did you save those letters? Did you save the letters?
Yeah, I have all my cards and letters from my college days. They're actually in storage in a plastic box, but I have everything. And my grandmother, who had only about 3rd grade education, the only grandparent I knew, she used to send me cards, and she couldn't write very much. She didn't write much, but she told amazing stories. She was very much within the oral tradition, and she would tell some absolutely frightening stories about ghosts and spirits, and swear that these were true, that they happened.
That's fascinating.
So she was very literate in that sense. So she was a great storyteller, and I think that comes from the Mexican culture. It comes from this, telling these kind of stories telling the stories is a way to pass along kind of morals about how to live life, about about the world of good and evil, which we see every day in different ways. And it, you know, they serve a real function. They're not just storytelling, you know. The ancients, when they told stories, you know, when the Vikings told stories, they served a function beyond entertainment. And I think I take that to heart. I think my stories on one level can be entertaining, but on another level, I am addressing many issues, whether it's sexism or other bigotries, anti-immigrant sentiment. I have one story in my collection called The Great Wall, and it's a dystopian story. I wrote a New York Times piece about it. It's a dystopian story where in the future, Trump has built his wall, and it's a gold monstrosity with images of his life embedded on it.
Oh my.
And he has a family separation problem, a family separation program in place, and an underground, a reverse underground railroad's been created to reunite children from their with their family in Mexico. So these stories are entertaining on one level, but another level, I'm addressing serious issues.
Yeah. Do you have, is there anywhere we can read that story you wrote about your father on his reading life? Is there a link or somewhere we could?
Yes.
If you
Yes.
could send it to me, I'll share it with people because I'd love to read it. I'd
Yeah.
love to.
It's was published by Stanford Magazine,
Okay.
and it's online. It's actually they have the entire magazine online, and
Stanford.
if you Google Stanford Magazine and my name, it should pop up.
Okay, I'll check it out because I'd really like to read it. Yeah.
Yeah. That was I wrote it just after he had passed. You know, it's writing for me can be very cathartic. It can help me kind of pull together some of my thoughts. I also wrote another piece about my dad that was published in Writer magazine. You know, it's called The Writer. That's the name of the magazine, and it's about my receiving after he passed of his manual typewriter, his quiet deluxe typewriter, and that piece is not online. You have to get, unfortunately, the print version of it to see it. And it you know, it's about his writing life and how he stopped writing, basically, at least writing fiction and poetry.
Yeah.
Yes.
Anybody else?
I'd like to follow up on Jeffrey's question. I don't want this to be all about your father because I had a mother, much like your father. She was a teacher and rather thwarted because she was a mathematician too, but it was the 40s and World War II. And very conservative Southern background. And she got Parkinson's when I was 12, and we had to move. And because we had no insurance because it was considered, you know, we couldn't get it. And so she had my father burn an entire file cabinet full of her writing when I was maybe 16. And so that's always been a huge grief for me. But I've always thought that if my mother hadn't wanted to write so much with her whole heart, more than anything else in the world, and instilled that in me, I wouldn't be the writer I am. And I just wondered if that was the case with you and your father. Do you think you would have been an attorney and this if you hadn't had the background you did with him giving up?
Interesting question. I was on a panel with a couple of writers, including Steve Erickson, who's an amazing novelist. And I told a story about my dad and then my going to law school. Steve said something interesting, which I never realized, but I think he's right. He said, you know, you probably after watching what your dad went through. That's probably why you went to law school. And
I became a
but
journalist instead of a novelist.
yeah, exactly. But the writer in you eventually came out, because I started writing fiction at 39, you know, which is considered late in life. I don't have an MFA. So certainly I think I'm a writer because of my father and mother. My mother, who's 90 and is just she's so smart and thoughtful and just a remarkable person. She and my father just encouraged us to get educated and to read and to follow our hearts. And frankly, if I had told them while at Stanford, when I majored in English, they were delighted. They thought that was fantastic. They figured I would find a job. You know, they weren't worried. I think some parents would panic and say, "Oh my God, an English major," but they were shocked and, in fact, maybe even disappointed when I applied to law school. Because
So
they always viewed me as being very creative and that I go into the arts.
Well, they were
Um,
obviously correct.
yeah, I eventually got there. So, you know, it's interesting. It's fascinating, you know, being a parent myself, and my wife and I, you know, we both thought our son would make an amazing lawyer, but he's a video game designer and he's doing great. And he loves what he does. He went to UCLA, majored in anthropology. He's a very diverse person. He's Chicano and Jewish and gay. So he has all these wonderful elements. My wife is Jewish. I converted actually many, many years ago. And so he's a very diverse person with and very handsome and thoughtful, and just, he has all these great things, and he found his path, you know. And we were thinking, well, he argued so well, being the son of two lawyers. He argued so well. We thought he'd be a great lawyer and he could go do civil rights or something, but he's having a blast as a video game designer and bringing his sense of diversity to
And his own sense of art.
yeah. So
Thank you.
Cool.
thank you, Kathy.
Yeah, go ahead. Anybody
Yes,
else?
lovely. Yes.
Well, I have
Oh.
to say that I'm impressed by everything I heard, because you said that 39 is kind of late in life to write. Well, I am 73 and I published my first book 2 years ago.
That's
Well,
wonderful.
I have published other works, but they were not really published for the public. Like, I wrote manuals and different documents when I worked overseas for U.S. Treasury, but these were not really, documents or books that were really out for sale.
Mhm.
So I think the writing, or maybe that writing desire was hidden somewhere in me because my father was a prominent professor, and he has written, I don't know, maybe 300-400, I don't know how many books and articles and everything, but his writing was more into the area of linguistics. He was a professor in linguistics. So I take maybe this from him, that I have this desire to write, but I went a completely different genre, because my writing is a memoir, my first book. And I have a second one, and maybe I'll stop at the second one. But I'm impressed by everything I heard. I'm looking forward maybe reading some of your stories, because I have to tell you that I went to Mexico for the first time in 1982 on a scholarship. I studied at Iberoamericana University in Mexico City, and before I went there, coming from Europe, and being so busy in the States, I had no idea about the culture of Mexico. And I was just amazed. Mexican culture is so rich, and everything I saw there, it was just amazing, because they took us on a lot of cultural trips from Mexico City. So I fell in love in Mexico in 1982, and I'm very much interested in anything that is produced in that aspect from Mexican writers, artists, and so forth. So looking forward to read some of your works. Yes.
Thank you. Well, Mexico City is one of the most vibrant cities. It's so intellectual and artistic, and the music and the food and the museums and
Oh,
on and on and on. It just is a remarkable place, and it's one of my favorite cities of all time.
mine too.
Yeah.
Mine too. I fell in
Lovely.
love with it. Yes.
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah, I was fascinated when you said that you write fables.
Mhm.
And I just picked up on that, and I wondered, I mean, I don't know people who write fables. So talk to me about fables. And you talked about the moral aspect of some of the, what you're expressing through your stories as well. But your fables, that's really intriguing. And do you bring the magical realism into those stories as well?
Yes, yeah, I do. And the fables are one of the stories is a good example. That's actually was published in a Norton anthology. And that one is about, it's called, what is the name of it? I've written so many stories.
You have.
Um,
Okay.
I'm blanking on the name of it. If it's even in this collection, maybe I'm thinking of a different collection. Oh, it's in a different collection. I apologize. So one of the stories in this collection is about a fisherman in a village, and he has a wife and children. And every day he goes to his, he has breakfast with his family, and then he goes off to his little hut to work on making nets and fishing. And one day he looks out and he sees a boat just sitting there, and he doesn't know why it's there. He goes out and he decides to get into the boat, and he starts to row, and he ends up going to this island. And he knows he shouldn't go there. And eventually he has an accident in the boat, and his soul leaves him and visits his family, and he sees his family, his wife and children, and he is just pained because he misses his family and he can't touch them, they can't see him. And then his soul goes back to his body, and then he rows back to his hut, and he swears he's never going to do that again. The next morning he has breakfast with his family and gives his wife and kids a kiss, and then he goes back to the hut, and the boat appears again, and he walks to it, and he decides to get back in the boat. So it's a fable. It's a fable about human frailty and about people not always appreciating what they have. So I like to write stories like that address the frailties of of folks, and sometimes the devil appears in my stories too, and the devil usually is not some grotesque creature. Usually it's someone in a suit, or it's a beautiful woman, or whatever. And never forcing people to do anything that people don't have it in them to do, but just kind of giving them the temptation. So those are kind of fables I put into my stories.
Fascinating.
I have another question.
Yes, Jeffrey.
When in your career did you begin to think of your approach to writing, or likening your approach to writing as that of approaching it as a character actor? Was it a reaction to getting bored, wanting to change things up? I'm curious to know how you came to think of it that way.
Really good question. I reached a point maybe about 10 years ago when I felt like I was beginning to repeat myself. And that panicked me,
Mm.
and it was around that time I began to see myself like a character actor. And when a character actor starts to, when an actor starts to repeat themselves, and they start it's like Al Pacino becoming too much Al Pacino,
Mhm.
going full Pacino, right? When he starts almost doing a caricature of himself. I was doing a caricature, began to do a caricature of my own writing, kind of beginning to fall into tropes and styles that I was, repeating myself. So I pulled back and stopped writing fiction for about 6 months and just I focused on poetry, writing essays, book reviews, and did a lot of reading of some of my favorite short story writers to kind of clean my palette, to kind of get back on track. So it was around then I viewed myself, my writing, almost as if I were a character actor. That hasn't happened since. I kind of learned my lesson. There are some writers who, I won't mention them, but some of them are very famous and very wealthy, but they follow a formula, and they know they're following a formula, and that's okay with them because they want to make a lot of money. And there's one particular writer, I remember watching I won't give his name, but maybe you'll guess who it is. He was a salesman, and he wanted to become a romance writer. So he studied romance novels, studied them, and then he created a formula, and then he just produces romance novels. And he's very wealthy, very, very wealthy. And his novels have been turned into movies. To me, that's not, well, I guess if you get joy from raking in money, that's fine. I make a good living as a lawyer. I'm comfortable as a lawyer. I don't need to, I don't want for anything. So my writing is, I do it because it gives me joy, and it's something that I'm compelled to do, and something that if it stops being enjoyable and fun and interesting to me, I'll stop doing it. So that's a long answer to a short question.
A great answer. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you, Jeffrey.
Daniel, you write a lot and everything, but what is your inspiration? For me, when I get around a bunch of writers and I hear them talking, then all of a sudden I'm on fire again. Or if by seeing your cover, it inspires me to start something new I've never done in painting, a new direction or whatever, not copying, but putting my own spin on something. What inspires you, and who are your favorite authors?
I read a lot, and I do a lot of author interviews. I've been interviewing Latina writers for the Los Angeles Review of Books for the last 10 years. So people like Reina Grande and Luis Alberto Urrea,
I love him.
and Rigoberto Gonzalez, who's a wonderful poet and novelist, short story writer, and Liz Huerta I've interviewed for which publication? I forget which publication I interviewed her for. So these are writers who just are all over the map. Oh, another wonderful writer, Gabino Iglesias. Gabino Iglesias wrote. He calls it border noir fiction.
Oh yeah.
And he mixes magical realism and noir. And I interviewed him for the LA Review Books about his novel "The Devil Takes You Home," which is just a kick-ass novel. And people like him, and Sylvia Moreno Garcia, who wrote The Daughter of Dr. Moreau, which is her, and she wrote Mexican Gothic. And so I interviewed her for another publication. Writers like that, they just inspire me. In fact, reading writers who take a classic novel like, The Island of Dr. Moreau by H.G. Wells, and then turning it into a different kind of, kind of a modern or a different take, a different sensibility. And Sylvia was addressing colonialism and sexism, and in her version of the Moreau story. Inspired me to write the novel Chicano Frankenstein.
Yeah, I can't wait to read that.
And so I'm deeply inspired. Writers who get jealous of other writers, I mean, that's a sad.
It's sad.
Writers who are inspired by other writers and can take joy in what they produce and be inspired by what they do. That's the way to live, to take joy. If you can take joy in other people's success and in what they create. And in the end, I never want to lose that appreciation of other writers and what they do and the way they tell stories, because they only help to fulfill me as a person, as a reader, but also they can spark my creativity. And here's one example, and it's sort of a funny example. Gabino Iglesias is very active on Twitter, and every Friday he'll do Friday reads, and he will say, okay, I'm pushing my book, what's your book? And then people will post something about something they're working on. During one of those sessions, he mentioned he was having surgery to have a non-benign lump removed from his neck or shoulder. It was around here. And I on Twitter, I said, I'm going to write a short story about that. So I wrote a short story about a man who has a lump removed, and he saves the lump. The doctor gives it to him in a little jar.
Oh my gosh.
The lump eventually grows into his roommate. So he has a roommate, and they become, there's like a bromance, it becomes his roommate. They share duties in the apartment. His mother wants him to get married, but, and she thinks it's odd that his lump has grown into this roommate. And then one day the roommate goes out and sees the world and then comes back, and his roommate whom he calls, he named him Nacho. Nacho's so angry. He comes home and he says, why didn't you tell me? And the guy says, what do you mean? And Nacho says, why did you tell me the world out there was so beautiful? And he talks about how he went to a park, Balboa Park here in LA, in the Valley, and he saw the pond and he saw the ducks and he saw people and kids playing, all kinds of languages being spoken. He heard music playing, and they end up talking about the beauty of the world. And then they go to bed, and the next morning the man gets up and he goes to have breakfast with his roommate, but his roommate has left him. He left a goodbye note, and he's gone. And that's how it ends. He's bewildered and distressed that this lump that grew up into a roommate has left him. And that story is in my collection that's coming out next year.
Oh boy.
So and I dedicate the story, and it was published in a literary journal called The Rumpus, which is a wonderful journal. It's online, and I dedicated it to Gabino Iglesias because he gave me the idea. So the ideas for stories, they're everywhere.
Right.
They're everywhere. We just have to have an open heart and an open sensibility when it comes to seeing narratives that can come out of virtually any situation.
That's great.
So,
That's great. Is it called Nacho?
yes.
The story.
Oh, Nacho. You can actually read it. It's The Rumpus is a wonderful literary journal online, and if you go there, you can find it. And there's actually there's an artist who does illustrations for their stories, and there's some wonderful illustrations for the story.
Did you illustrate Nacho?
Oh, no.
I can just envision cartoonish. You said you were a cartoonist. I could just envision this cartoon. I mean, absolutely, that was hysterical.
So
I can see
no,
that becoming a series. I'm serious. I can see it becoming a Netflix series. That would be a twist on something. So
on a twist on the Odd Couple, right?
oh boy. Yeah, there you go. There's your
Which
pick.
when I was growing up, when I was a kid in the 70s, I loved the TV series, which is based, of course, on the play and the movie, the Neil Simon, the Odd Couple, which was
Oh yeah, yeah, me
originally a
too.
play, but then the TV series with Tony Randall and Jack Klugman was one of my favorite television shows. I'm a kid who grew up in the 60s and 70s, so I grew up watching. I read, but I love television and I love storytelling in the shows I watched. So I watched some of my favorite shows are like MASH and
Yep.
All in the Family and Mary Tyler Moore and Bob Newhart, all these old shows. But the reason why they were good shows, they were the storytelling, the script writing was, I mean, they put a lot of care and thought into telling these stories.
Right.
And so one of my dreams when I was a kid, I remember thinking, oh, I'd love to write a TV show. And who knows? I'm writing plays now, so maybe
You should
someday
do that. You should do that. I can see that becoming a TV show. How interesting. What a unique take. We have all these hospital shows. This could be kind of a really a twisted thing. I love it. I think it's great. So anybody have any other questions or comments? All right. Well, Daniel, this has been such a pleasure. You guys, if you want to ask him anything, his email is spelled Olivas, Dan at AOL.com. And
Believe
I
it or not,
put it up,
AOL,
I'll
yes.
put it up on the recording and you can email him, and definitely you need to check out all his books. I literally have been picking these since I started the Pulpwood Queens because I just love the stories, and
Oh, thank you.
I really like hearing even more about how they came about and look forward to more of them. But it sounds like to me you've got several careers in the future. You could do lots of things. And this is a big message out to everybody out there. Don't put yourself in that box. People go, well, I just had an author who spent 20 years writing 5 books in a series set in India, kind of like Downton Abbey, a royal family.
Mm,
And she had 500 rejections,
mm.
500. And I picked her book. And she goes, but what people don't realize is you got one person. Your dad had 10 people that turned him down, but there's literally thousands in the publishing business. So if anytime you get turned down, just remember it's usually just one person who turned you down. It's not a team of people or anything. So keep going. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Very
And if people want to go to my website, it's danielolivas.com. It's very simple. And
Olivas.
yes,
Olivas
danielolivas.com.
I think that's a hilarious story. Did everybody catch the Olivas?
Oh, leave us alone.
Leave us alone. You won't forget his name if you remember that. So
Also, when I hitchhiked to Ireland in college, the Irish people were wonderful. I never had a problem getting a ride. And
storyteller.
one of the people who picked me up said, Olivas, that could be an Irish name. Just add an apostrophe.
Olivas, I got it. Okay. Oh, that's hilarious. Yeah, they're storytellers too. Well,
Oh,
God.
yes.
Well, this has been fascinating, and I'm so thankful. I know you have a very busy life, and I'm just thrilled that you were with us again after all this time. And 2 books coming out next year, everybody, and I want to read those because
yes.
this Frankenstein thing sounds absolutely amazing to me because
Thank you.
it's the stories that haven't been told that I want to hear. The stories that will give people a non-stereotypical idea of what the Chicano or Hispanic life or American, whatever your life may be, because we all have preconceived opinions from where we come from in life. So it's time to get out of that comfort zone and read everything, everybody. So it's all about the story. Thank you, Daniel. You have
Thank
a
you,
wonderful
Kathy.
night and have a great time with your wife and keep writing. Okay.
Thank you. And thank you all for coming. I really loved your questions and great to see other writers. Thank
I
you.
should have this up by tomorrow morning on my YouTube channel. It's on the Pulpwood Queen Presents. Subscribe, everybody, and then you won't ever miss a recording. But you can share this. I'll make sure you get a copy. You can share it everywhere, and hopefully we'll have lots of people running to their favorite bookseller to get this book. So thank you so much.
Thank you,
Bye-bye
Kathy.
till next time.
Thank you.
See
Bye-bye.
y'all. Thank you, everybody.